Hey y'all! For those of you who don't already know me, my name is Sarah Beth Spizak. I'm a third-year veterinary student at the University of Florida, and I'm also a DVM 360 student ambassador. I've gotten lots of questions on my Instagram and in person about how clinics have been, and so I thought I would make a little video and just give you guys kind of a quick and dirty rundown of how clinics were for me. So the University of Florida does clinics a little bit differently than I think most vet schools do. We actually have our clinics split in half of them in our third year and half of them in our fourth year. So when I ended my second year, I went straight into clinics, which for me were online for a few weeks, but then we jumped into semi-normal clinics. And then I went from basically May to December of the sort of summer between my second year and third year and the first semester of my third year in clinics. And then the spring of my fourth year, I'll go back into clinics. So it's sort of two blocks of clinics. I really like the way that UF does their clinics because I was super tired of the classroom by the end of my second year, and it was nice to kind of get a break from the monotony of the classroom and go into clinics and do practical things. But then I also will be back in the classroom when I'm studying for NAVLE in this coming fall, which will be way less stress than being in clinics and studying for NAVLE. So let's get into it. First, I want to talk a little bit about the maybe less than ideal things about clinics, and then I'll talk about some of my favorite things about clinics. So probably the main thing that I think you just have to accept about clinics, which is not a super great thing, is that your schedule is no longer your own. You switch your schedule every 2 weeks, and almost every clinical rotation involves some form of on-call. And usually that on-call schedule isn't posted or published or finalized until the first day of the rotation. So every 2 weeks, not only do you have a totally different standard like daytime schedule, but you also find out what nights or weekends you're going to be on call. You may even have a hospitalized inpatient that you first have to take care of in the morning, which is kind of standard, but then it may end up going home on one of the weekend days, and so you have to come back in to do that patient's discharge. Also, every clinical rotation has different requirements for paperwork. In general, I think UF does a pretty good job not overloading the students with paperwork. I'm sure some of my classmates have a different opinion than that, but I didn't feel like we were super overloaded with paperwork, at least for the majority of my rotations. But you also you never know how much paperwork you're gonna have to do until you're doing it. So that's why I say your schedule is not your own. Some days I got out at 2 or 3 p.m. and had the rest of the day off. Other days I was there until 10 o'clock at night. Other days I left at 8 p.m. and was called back in at 10 p.m. and then was there from 10 p.m. until 2 a.m. Any of your personal life, it's really hard to work around clinics. And so it gets to be just really exhausting. Another thing about clinics that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but is something that you really have to just get used to, is changing your brain every 2 weeks. I don't know how else to say it. Every service in the hospital runs a little bit differently, and every doctor has a little bit of a different expectation from the students. So pretty much every 2 weeks when you go on a different service, you have to adjust your expectations and figure out what is expected of you. Some people say that that's really annoying, and there's definitely times that it gets frustrating, but I would argue that it's nice to learn different ways of doing things. If we went through all of our clinical blocks and every single service and every single doctor ran appointments the exact same way and did their paperwork the exact same way, we would all come out of school as these like cookie cutter doctors who only knew how to do things one way. And I don't think that that's ideal. So I think it's a blessing and a curse that things change a little bit and run differently in different services, but I think it's something that you have to kind of be ready for and kind of just accept. A lot of clinics is accepting the things that you cannot change. Okay, some of the good things about clinics. Almost everything else. Clinics for me were a blast. They were so much fun, and just the hands-on, like in the trenches learning is the way I learn best. I think for a lot of people in veterinary medicine, it's the same. We all have to slog through the classroom, but we all want to be working with the animals and with the clients and learn while we're doing the thing. Hold please. So a lot of you asked me to go over kind of the structure of clinics. And I'm going to go over kind of the basic structure that I had in most of my rotations, but just keep in mind that this will be different for probably different rotations, and it'll definitely be different in other vet schools. I have no idea what they do. For most of our rotations, when we saw appointments, typically it's the student's job to kind of either get assigned to an appointment or decide that they're going to take an appointment. Look at the records that are there for that appointment prior to the appointment time. For some cases it's the night before, for some cases it's the morning of. And then when the patient gets there, one of two things happens. Either you speak to the client first and get a history and figure out how the patient's doing either since they were last seen, or get a more detailed history if it's the first time that they're being seen by the hospital. Or you do your physical exam on the animal first and then talk to the client. So clinics during COVID meant that our client communication was almost 100% by phone, which is a little bit nerve-wracking because you feel like a cold caller. You have no idea who you're going to talk to on the other end. And I don't know about y'all, but whenever I'm going to go in an exam room to talk to someone, like in pre-COVID times, I always like peek in the window and just kind of like scope out who I'm talking to and how many people there are before I go in. And you don't get to do that on the phone. But vets do a ton of phone communication even without COVID as a factor, so I think it's really good practice, and it's a nice way for us to like still talk to the clients without like interacting directly with them, kind of limiting our COVID exposure and their COVID exposure from us. So once you've both spoken to the client and done the physical exam on your patient, then the next step is typically going to be to go find the doctor that is assigned to your case. Typically that's going to be the resident. Sometimes in some services, the residents are like chickens with their head cut off and running around like crazy, and so you'll go and you'll start on your paperwork first and then kind of wait for them to be ready for you. It just depends on the service. But when you find the resident, you want to basically round to them about your patient. For us, we always started with the signalment, and so that's the name, age, breed or species of your patient, and maybe kind of what they do. If it's like a horse, are they a show animal or a pet or that kind of a thing. And then they're presenting complaints. So why are they here today? If this is the first time we're seeing them for their problem, then you're going to give kind of the full detailed history. When did this start? Has it gotten better or worse? What has the owner already done? Or since we're kind of a referral tertiary institution, what have they done at other veterinarians prior to coming here? Then you're going to talk about any other kind of relevant history. So that would be things like comorbidities. If your patient is presenting for one thing, but they also have chronic illness, that'd be something to mention. And then you're going to talk about your physical exam findings. And then you're also going to take those abnormalities, take your history, and then you're going to go through a problem list. Problem list is what it sounds like. All the problems that that patient has. So it might look like vomiting, diarrhea, hives, lethargy, inappetence, and hyperlactatemia if you have blood work already. You go through those problems. And then you're going to think about some differentials. Now, a lot of times the doctors will help you come up with those. It kind of depends on where you are in clinics and where you are in that rotation, how much they expect out of you for those rounds. But you're going to talk about your differentials, meaning what do you think it might be? What do you think that patient's problem might be? And then you're going to talk about your plan. So if it's a really non-specific sign, like they're just presenting for lethargy and weight loss or something like that, then that differential list is a million miles long and it's kind of pointless. You could talk about some common things that might happen in in that signalment of patient. So I don't know, a young puppy versus an old cat are going to have sort of two different things, two different lists of things that might be bothering them. But in your plan, that's going to be what your next steps are going to be. Most typically, in most of our appointments, that's going to involve diagnostics. Now, I'll say at a tertiary institution, you could almost always get away with saying you want a CBC, Chem, UA, chest x-rays, and abdominal ultrasound. However, one, not everybody has that kind of money, even if they're at a tertiary institution. And two, you have to give reasons for why you want to do the diagnostics you want to do. Like, we could do blood work, for example, but if it's not going to change what we were going to do anyway, like it's not going to change our treatment, whatever the blood work says, then why are we doing it? Like, what's the point? So that's kind of how you generally start your appointments. And something else about clinics that I think is really important to know going in is that you get out of clinics what you put in. So the doctors that you work with are super busy, and basically at a referral institution, the residents are learning as well as the students are. And so the resident has to talk to you as the student and teach you, but then they have to come up with their plan, and then they have to present that to their faculty, who is the board certified doctor that's overseeing the resident, who is a doctor but is still in training for their board certification. And they have to approve that plan before things can move forward. And so you don't have all day typically to come up with a plan and come up with your differentials and things like that. And so that's where looking up your cases beforehand and just doing general research about the common things that you might see on the rotation you're on, that's where that's going to really help you. Because if you have no idea what you're talking about, then it's okay, but you're not going to be concluded in the conversation anymore. And so, like, if you run out of time, then basically most residents are going to say, okay, let's just go talk to the faculty together. And the resident's just going to present their plan and talk about their differentials and then move forward with the patient. Now, you learn things from that conversation, and so I would encourage you, like, I followed doctors around, and you feel awkward and you feel like you're an annoying person when you kind of just follow doctors around, but that's what you have to do sometimes to get what you need to get out of clinics. And then the technicians, oh my gosh, the technicians know 27 times more than the doctors know and 57 times more than you know. The technicians are amazing, and I can say this like point blank. It doesn't matter where you're going to school. I guarantee you the technicians are fantastic, and you need to learn from them, and you need to respect the hell out of them, because they've been doing their jobs way longer than you've been a vet student. So if you're someone who feels like you want to practice your technical skills, which you should be someone who wants to practice your technical skills, then definitely ask the technicians to help you. Things like blood draws, IV catheters, cleaning ears, placing standing bandages, all kinds of stuff. The technicians can teach you and help you learn those things. When you're out in practice as a doctor, the technicians working for you are going to look to you to help them with those technical skills. And hopefully, like, you have techs that are really well trained and know how to do those things, but the doctor's, the backstop. And so if there's a cat that's really hard to get an IV catheter in or something like that, and 3 techs try, like, you're the backstop, like, you're the one that needs to be able to put that IV catheter in. When I was on the ICU rotation, I got to place a nasogastric tube, I got to help place 2 esophageal tubes, and those are things that the techs know how to do. Hey y'all, I am recording a second part of my clinic's YouTube video. I was recording the first part, obviously in Ariana's paddock, but that day that I was recording, I had lots of phone issues and low battery issues, and there was a lot of noise going on, so I stopped recording that day. And now it's about a week later, and I have some more time on my hands, so I'm gonna try to record some more parts of it. As you can see, I've gotten a haircut since that video, so sorry for the continuity errors, but I still wanted to give you guys some more information. So hopefully this video isn't too long, but let's get into it. I got lots of questions about like how to succeed in clinics and what my advice is for getting through clinics, and so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. I think clinics are really scary, and they're really scary no matter if you are going to graduate as valedictorian and you know literally all the things, or if you are like at the bottom of your class and don't study and don't know anything. Like, clinics are scary no matter what. So I would definitely say my best sort of advice for clinics would be to be as prepared as you can. A lot of times that means like just knowing your case really well, and so knowing the history really well, every medication your pet has been on. A lot of doctors like to ask for drug dosages. That was one thing that like I wasn't super prepared for in my first rotation, but then quickly figured that one out. And so just have looked at like all the pertinent things and know what you're talking about. But that preparation is also for the disease processes, and that can happen both like before you start the case and while you're working on the case. It's going to depend a little bit on the pace and the speed of whatever rotation you're on, but there's definitely some where like the patient's there all day, and so you have a little bit of, quote unquote downtime after you've already done your initial case presentation. And so like if you have a working diagnosis for your patient, go look up that disease, like go understand the pathophysiology of that disease, go find the latest research on that disease. I had a couple of occasions where like I found new research from the last couple of years that the doctors weren't familiar with yet. And they would be like, oh man, send me that article and stuff like that. And so just like trying to be as prepared as possible and using your resources. Like, you don't have to have all the information in your head. God, no. Like, look up stuff. This is quickly turning into like a clinics tips video, but I think you guys would probably like that even more than the things I liked about clinics. So we'll keep going. Ask questions, but also know when to ask those questions. I think this is where some people get burned, because sometimes people will feel like doctors dismiss them or doctors are rude to them when they're trying to learn and trying to ask questions. And doctors should never be rude to students, like that's a given. But there's also a time and a place to ask for questions and ask for a discussion on a certain topic. So I think you have to kind of feel out your service. For some services, morning rounds are a time to have conversations and they're a time to have discussions. For other services, morning rounds are just a way for everyone on the service to be aware of what patients are coming in, what their condition is, what their presenting complaint is, and what the general plan is for the day. They're not a time to sort of have those conversations. And so if on that first Monday, two doctors get into like a 10-minute long back and forth about the plan for a particularly difficult patient, that's probably their norm and that's probably what they expect from you. And so like be prepared to discuss things, and if you have questions, like bring those questions to rounds, and be ready to talk about it. And I think it's a good time to learn, and it's also a good time for your classmates who don't have your case to like learn from your case too. If rounds are not the time for that conversation and that type of rotation, then ask for that time. Some services do like sort of morning cage side rounds, but then they also do clinical rounds later in the day where they're like teaching and talking about general disease processes, and they might like use case examples, but they're kind of generally talking about things. And other services don't have like a formal system like that. Like, find your resident or potentially your faculty and ask for 10 minutes. Like, just be like, hey, I've been looking into Samson's diabetes a little bit more thoroughly and reading the research on it, and I just have some questions about the pathophysiology about it, or I just have some questions about the type of insulin that we're choosing to use and sort of the pros and cons. Would we be able to sit down at some point today and just kind of go over some details of that? And like, I promise you, the doctors love that stuff. They may not have the moment right then to sit down with you, but if you ask them to make time, they should make time. Okay, another thing about clinics is templates. Now, some services have like ready-made templates. The ophthalmology service at UF is amazing for that. They have a discharge for almost every disease that they see, and so you just open up one of those discharges and it already has like a lot of the explanation of the disease filled out, and you just go in and like fill in your patient's name, fix the pronouns, and like just add in any extra pertinent details, take out anything that's not relevant, all that kind of good stuff. So templates are amazing. But if the service doesn't like have templates already, two things. One, talk to your upperclassmen, talk to your friends, and share templates with each other. At UF, we have like a giant shared drive that is across all the computers on campus, and we each have folders there, and so you can talk to your friends in other that are above you in the curriculum, or just in other friends that have had rotations before you, and like trade documents and things like that of templates that people have made. And there's some really good ones on there. But then also, like, I save my own templates. So like, I've had, a couple of complicated cases where I've essentially had to write a discharge from scratch, just because it's like a weird case, or there just wasn't a template for that disease that I could find anywhere. And so like, I use my notes and I go on VIN, or I go on Veterinary Partner, which is a really great like client website, or just sort of go on Google and like find some resources on there and make myself a discharge. And like, especially once the doctor has looked at it and made their edits and like signed off on it, you better believe I am copying and pasting that into a Word document and saving that in my shared folder, so that in the future, if I have a similar case, or a case that I can like use elements from that, I'm gonna use that. Don't reinvent the wheel. Last clinic tip is going to be to cherish and respect all of your technicians and nurses that you work with, and your assistants, kennel techs, everybody that you work with that's in patient care. As students, most of the time we do have a lot of patient care, but we have probably less than half to less than a quarter of the patient care that the technicians have. They're the ones that are going to help you with your patient. They're going to tell you things that they notice. They may even give you hints about what you should do next in your case, and then you can look extra smart to your doctor. I say this both, having gone through clinics and seeing how amazing the technicians are in the teaching hospital, but also having been a vet tech myself, and I actually worked in the teaching hospital as a tech for a couple of months before starting vet school. And so it's really easy for that job to be kind of brushed over and ignored, but I think vet techs and assistants and kennel techs are definitely the unsung heroes of the vet world, and it's just as important to know that as a student as it is as a veterinarian. So definitely look up to your techs and learn from them, ask them questions. I would sometimes ask them questions that I felt like, there's no such thing as a stupid question, but sometimes you feel like you have a stupid question, and I would ask the techs. Okay, leave questions down in the comments below. I'm happy to like do follow-up videos or anything like that. This one is going to be super long, so if you've gotten to the end, congratulations. And yeah, comment below, like this, subscribe to me if you're not already, and go follow me on Instagram at SarahBethBecomesAVet.